So welcome everyone to the first official episode of my Create Mod tutorial series. So in this episode we will be focusing on Create Mod Power. So how this series is going to basically work is I'm going to basically have a bunch of stuff already built, and I'm going to walk you through the pros, cons, and other related things related to each of these different things, and how it in general works based on what I have currently learned, and I intend on learning more about some of these things later on down the line because I don't know especially much about these modded add-on powers as much, but I do know a little bit. So basically we're going to start off with the basic power. So the first power thing that we have going on here is the water wheel, which is one of the basic forms of power within the Create mod. Water wheels are efficient and will continually produce power forever. Just it cannot produce more than 256, and you need water or lava. Lava does work to flow over it to produce things, and they also prevent water spillage over the sides based on how it runs. So that's part of how its spillage works, though be aware that it will spread out if you put it on the ground like that. And another note about water wheels, it only requires the water to flow. It needs to be flowing water, but it only needs to flow over one side. So you can have it mostly exposed like this. If you want, it does not make any difference on power depending whether or not you have this or this. So that does not matter. The same thing applies to the large water wheels. You only need to have it flowing over one block, and so you can have most of it exposed, and it can be looking pretty nice in your world. Be aware that this produces twice as much, though moves a lot slower than this one, thereby making this one faster for early game until you get a speed controller, but this one is superior in many fashions to this one for larger builds. Then there is the basic power source, the hand crank. If you are in survival mode, you can flip it, turn it the other way using a left click, but being that I'm in creative mode, I cannot do that, and I just break the block. And I'm not going to bother switching over, so yeah, that's another one. This is mobile, very easy to use, and is great for things like saws and other things. That's basically that. This is the most efficient and most configurable source of power, the steam engine, which requires a lot of resources and is in itself quite efficient, and paired with a bunch of other things will work very well. This is a not especially good one because I cannot seem to get it to actually not be idle. And there's things that we could do to make this better, and this is just sort of like to demonstrate. So for this you need some sort of fuel input: logs, lava, blaze cakes, charcoal, coal, into the blaze burner underneath. And also this it does not require a blaze burner, just blaze burners are one of the best heat source for this, with blaze cakes being the best fuel for the blaze burner. It needs to be put in an item form and be released somehow. You can use a mechanical arm for that purpose, and I would recommend, we'll go over the steam engines in more depth in the steam engine video. And you also need to pump it full of water. For my tutorials, I will be using a lot of creative generators and tanks, motors, and the crates here, which just allow you to automatically produce things so I don't have to have as many farms running into each as possible as we move through the series. And when you eject the buckets, you can have it cycling through a filling station, depending on how you want to go about it, but I will talk about that later on. Then there are basically two more sources of power in the default Create mod thing. There is the windmill bearing, and of course the creative motor. The creative motor itself is not obtainable in survival, as it is said the creative motor, and can be configured on speed and direction, and you can get it to go either way depending on how you want it. Now, the windmill bearing is probably the second most efficient and one of the most configurable methods of power, being that it can be used both with wool blocks or just straight up with windmill sails, which in itself, let's see, sail. Let's see, we got the windmill sail, which requires wool of any type, sticks, and andesite alloy, but the straight up wool requires super glue, which requires finding slimes, killing them, and crafting super glue, which requires iron sheets, iron nuggets, and 2 slime balls. It does have durability and is not used up, and it can also be enchanted with mending. Okay, so, and also these things require 8 of either sails or wool blocks to function. As you can see here, if we go here, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That has 8. If we break one and try to do it again, it is unable to assemble because it does not have 8. Same thing goes for, see, there it goes again. We do the same thing with this one. We break one, we click on it, unable to assemble, minimum of 8 are required, and these can be made bigger or smaller depending on your needs and how you want it to go, and they can be changed as to which direction you want them to spin. And they can be made in many different ways. With, like, if you wanted to, you could. In theory, well, you could very easily do it something like this, and I believe that, if I'm remembering correctly, you do not require super glue for it to work like this, and you don't necessarily need more than 1 block, as these things connect to themselves and operate as you saw before. It does not matter, and you can make it as big or as small as you want depending on your power needs. These things produce these ones produce 512 at their base capacity, but if we were to extend this, well, actually, so they will produce 512, and yes, it will only produce 512, but depending on how many sails you add, it will make the windmill fast. It will make it faster, and it will make it produce more speed, though I think it is incremental based on how many, like, based on a certain percentage that I don't know off the top of my head, or I'd have to look it up to know how many you'd be able to get the certain number. So it will increase speed, and it will increase rotation and rotation power afterwards, based on how many sails you have. And it does not matter if they are facing the same direction, and it is just aesthetic purposes. Make sense? Okay. Now, moving on to the add-on create diesel generators. These are not especially efficient as compared to these. They are just an aesthetically pleasing, basically, conversion of diesel, which in the mod itself has a whole bunch of different liquids required to combine and make into diesel, which allow you to produce electricity in a smaller thing. It's just a smaller, more compact version that is it's not very fuel efficient, and you can't configure how much power it produces or how really long it lasts, it's very hard to configure it, and I'm pretty sure you cannot configure how much power these things produce in the world settings. Then, this one is an extended version of this, and I believe it just basically spreads it out and produces more power more efficiently, but also uses up fuel faster. And there is a third one, which I tried placing down, and I don't know how this one works. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna look into that later. There's that as well. And then we also have, in Create New Age, basically these motors, which are meant to be configurable with other mods that produce electricity. For instance, I'm trying to remember a mod right off the top of my head, Immersive Engineering. It can convert electricity into rotational force for create machines. And that's basically how it works, and depending on which tier you have, will produce a different amount of force, depending on how much, and can consume and store a certain amount of electricity at once. And then we move on to create crafts and additions, which has an electric motor, which does basically the same thing, just you can configure how fast and which direction you want it to move. And then with it back to Create New Age, there are basically two other types of power with it. Yeah, there are solar powers, which basically produce a different amount of temperature per second, which is used for something. I'm not exactly sure what temperature is used for, aside from, well, I believe it is used for these Stirling engines, which produce rotational force, and are not especially efficient, because they're just kind of garbage, and I don't know why this is not doing it anymore. Well, it's weird. Anyway, then we have the generator coil, which is basically a magnetic electric generator. This does require rotational force to operate. Basically, you'd hook up a water wheel or something to the back of this, get it to spin, and while it is spinning, it will produce electrical power. Now, there are a bunch of different tiers of magnets, which magnetite, redstone magnet, layered magnet, flux-type magnet, netherite magnet, which you can then layer to get different power levels, I believe. And it produces different things, and basically, if you don't have rotational force, it does not produce electricity, and then you can use that electricity to travel around and then reconvert it back into rotational force using a motor or some other thing. Yes, and then we have the last one from Create New Age, which is basically a nuclear reactor, but I have no idea how this thing works, or I have no idea how this thing works very well or anything. I had it working earlier. I have no idea why it is no longer working, but it was able to power basically all of these to a very low level with the heat it was generating through these reactor rods. And yeah, and I have no idea how you get these nuclear fuel things. Anyway, yeah, that is basically my general first tutorial on the power. If you are working with Create Mod, I would recommend working with all of these, and maybe this one. Maybe this one and these. These, I have seen, are not especially efficient and not worth using unless you need something really small, in which case you require a lot of pipes to move items or liquids around, which is not especially good. And these, I've never used these or this one, and I have no idea. This is probably extremely expensive and probably does not work especially well. So I would recommend sticking to these, with this one being the highest tier, most efficient, and most expensive one that you could choose. So anyway, so that is going to be the end of this episode. Next episode, I'm going to be going over cobblestone generating and how you would go about farming cobblestone using Create Mod specific things. So I will catch you guys in the next episode. Bye.